green bean casserole was still warm in my hands when my daughter-in-law looked at me across the Thanksgiving table and said, "Honestly, Norma, I don't know why you even bother coming. You never actually contribute anything meaningful to this family." The room went quiet. My son looked down at his plate. My two grandchildren, Kaylee, who was 12, and Brody, who was 9, both froze mid-bite, eyes darting between their mother and me. My sister-in-law Patrice, who had driven 3 hours from Columbus to be there, slowly set down her wine glass. I remember thinking very clearly that the casserole in my hands was still warm. I had made it that morning at 5:45, before the sun was up, standing in my kitchen in my housecoat, because I wanted to make sure it had time to rest properly before the drive. I had used the recipe my mother wrote on an index card in 1974. I had driven 40 minutes each way to get the French's fried onions because my local Kroger was out, and I had not said a word about any of that. I set the dish down on the table, very carefully, and then I looked at my daughter-in-law and I said, "Sweetheart, I think you should finish that thought." She blinked. She had not expected that. Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because none of this happened overnight. My son Garrett married Lena 6 years ago. She was 31, he was 34. She had 2 children from her first marriage, Kaylee and Brody. And I want to be clear about this because it matters to the story. Those children came into my life as my grandchildren from the first day I met them, and I have never for one moment treated them as anything less. When Lena and Garrett told me about the kids, I drove to Target and bought 2 Christmas stockings with their names on them, before their engagement was even official. I put photos of them on my refrigerator next to every other family photo I had. I showed up to Brody's Little League games even when Garrett couldn't make it. I learned that Kaylee was allergic to tree nuts, and I reorganized my entire pantry. I am a retired middle school librarian. I worked for 31 years. My husband Harold passed 8 years ago, and I have been managing on my Social Security, my pension, and the modest savings we built together. I am not a wealthy woman, but I am comfortable, and I have always believed that family is worth spending on. Over the 6 years of their marriage, I helped where I could. When Garrett and Lena bought their house in Westerville, I gave them $12,000 for the down payment. I didn't ask for it back. I told them it was a gift, and I meant it. When their furnace went out 2 winters ago, I put $4,800 on my Visa because they didn't have the savings to cover it, and it was February, and the kids were cold. When Lena decided she wanted to go back to school for her real estate license, I paid for her prep course and her exam fees. I drove Kaylee to gymnastics every Tuesday for a year when Lena's schedule got complicated. None of this was done to earn anything. I did it because I loved my son and I loved those children, and I wanted them to be okay. That is what mothers do. That is what grandmothers do. But Lena had never in 6 years said thank you. Not once. Not for the down payment, not for the furnace, not for the Tuesday drives or the Little League games or the tree nut-free pantry. Garrett would sometimes say it, a little awkwardly, as if he was apologizing on her behalf. Patrice used to pull me aside and say, "Norma, you know this isn't right." I would tell her I didn't do it for thank yous. I believed that then. What I did not see, what I refused to see, maybe, was that Lena's silence wasn't just poor manners. It was something else, a kind of quiet contempt that was building into something larger. The first time I really noticed it was at Easter, 2 years into the marriage. I had brought an Easter basket for each of the kids, the kind I used to make for Garrett when he was small. Grass and foil eggs and a chocolate bunny and a few small gifts tucked in. Lena looked at the baskets and then looked at me and said, "Oh, I already did that." Her baskets were store-bought. The kids grabbed mine immediately because there was a Lego set in Brody's. Lena didn't speak to me for the rest of the afternoon. After that, it became a pattern. If I brought food, she had already cooked. If I offered to watch the kids, she had already arranged something else. If I made a suggestion about anything, a pediatrician, a school program, a vacation idea, she would smile tightly and say, "We've got it handled, Norma." Every kindness I extended was returned as a slight. Every attempt I made to be useful was treated as an intrusion. I started second-guessing myself. Maybe I was overstepping. Maybe I was one of those mothers-in-law who couldn't let go. I talked to my friend Deanna about it, and she said, Norma, you paid for their furnace, and she's never said thank you. That's not you overstepping. That's her taking advantage. But I didn't want to believe that about the mother of my grandchildren. I kept trying. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around this year, I had convinced myself that we had reached a kind of equilibrium. Lena and I were not close, but we were polite. We managed. I had lowered my expectations to a level I could sustain, and I thought she had too. I made the green bean casserole and a sweet potato pie and a batch of dinner rolls from scratch. I drove the 40 minutes. I brought wine that I knew Lena liked, a bottle of Whispering Angel that I'd specifically asked the woman at the wine shop about because I wanted to get it right. I walked in and Lena was in the kitchen, and she did not look up from what she was doing. Garrett hugged me at the door. The kids ran to me, and that, at least, was real. Brody grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the couch to show me something on his tablet, and Kaylee asked me if I'd brought the sweet potato pie. And I had, and for a few minutes it was fine. Patrice arrived at noon. My son's college friend, Derek, and his wife came around 12:30. We set the table together, the way families do, and it was almost normal. I don't know what shifted. I've replayed it many times. I think Lena had been drinking since before we arrived. Not obviously, but enough that her filter was thinner than usual. At the table, when we were going around saying what we were thankful for, I said I was thankful for the children, and for Garrett, and for having a family to share the holiday with. It was sincere. I meant every word. Lena looked at me across the table and said what she said. That I didn't contribute anything meaningful. That she didn't know why I bothered coming. I heard Patrice draw a sharp breath. I heard Derek's wife murmur something under her breath. I heard the silence from my son, which was its own kind of answer. When I told Lena to finish her thought, she did. She said that every time I came over, she felt like I was inspecting her house and judging her parenting. She said the money I gave them came with strings attached, even if I never said so out loud. She said she was tired of feeling like she owed me something. She said I made her feel like a charity case in her own home. She said it all very clearly, the way people say things they have been thinking for a long time and finally decided to release. And when she finished, I nodded. I took a breath, and then I said, "Thank you for being honest. Now I'll be honest with you." I told her that I had given them $12,000 for their down payment with no strings and no expectation of repayment. That I had paid $4,800 to keep her children warm in February. That I had paid for her real estate courses because I wanted her to have options. I told her I had driven Kaylee to gymnastics 47 Tuesdays in a row because she asked me to and because I loved that little girl. I told her I had never once asked for a thank you, and I had never gotten one, and I had made peace with that. But I was not going to sit at her Thanksgiving table and be told I did not contribute anything because that was not the truth, and she knew it was not the truth. Then I said the part I had not planned to say, but that had been sitting in my chest for 6 years. I said, if my presence in this family is a burden to you, then I won't burden you. But I want you to understand something clearly. The support I've given this family has been a choice I made out of love, and it is a choice I can unmake just as freely. The table was silent. Derek cleared his throat. Patrice was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. It was somewhere between proud and afraid. My son finally spoke. He said, "Mom." And Lena pushed back her chair and left the table. Garrett followed her. I could hear them in the kitchen, their voices low and tense. The kids sat very still. Brody was looking at his plate. Kaylee was looking at me, and her expression was so careful, so grown up for 12 that it broke my heart a little. I reached over and patted her hand. I said, "Eat your food, baby. It's getting cold." Patrice leaned close to me and said very quietly, "You doing okay?" I said I was. It was 20 minutes before Garrett came back to the table. Lena did not come back. He sat down and he served himself more mashed potatoes like nothing had happened. And the conversation started up again slowly, the way conversations do after something hard, and we got through the rest of the meal. After dinner, when the kids were in the other room and Derek and his wife were getting their coats, Garrett found me in the kitchen. I was rinsing dishes. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I turned off the faucet and turned around. He said, "I know she was wrong, I've known for a long time that things weren't. I've let things go on too long." He looked like he hadn't slept. He said, "The stuff you've done for us, I know. I've always known." I looked at my son, who was 39 years old and had the same eyes as his father. I said, "I know you know, Garrett." He said, "I don't know what to do." I said, "That's not mine to figure out, but I want you to hear me when I tell you this. I love you and those children more than anything in this world. That doesn't change. But I cannot keep giving to someone who resents me for it. That's not good for her, and it's not good for me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know, Mom, you're right." I drove home that night with Patrice following me in her car because she'd insisted, and I sat in my driveway for a few minutes after she left, not ready to go inside yet. The porch light was on. I always set it on a timer when I know I'm going to be out after dark, a habit from all the years alone. I thought about Harold. He would have known what to say at that table. He would have known what to say in the kitchen with Garrett. He always did. I had spent 8 years learning to speak for myself without him, and I thought I'd gotten pretty good at it. But sitting in that driveway, I just felt tired. I also felt, underneath the tired, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clean. Like I had finally said a thing that needed to be said, and whatever came next, I had been honest. The following Monday, I called my financial advisor. I had been meaning to update my estate documents anyway. Harold's name was still on several things, and I made an appointment for Wednesday. I am not telling you this to be dramatic. I am telling you because it was a practical step I should have taken years ago, and the conversation at Thanksgiving was what finally made me do it. Whatever my son worked through in his marriage was between him and his wife. But I had spent 6 years funding a household where I was considered a burden, and I was 63 years old, and it was time to be intentional about where my resources went. I did not cut anyone off. That is not who I am, but I stopped writing checks reflexively. I stopped saying yes before I finished hearing the question. Garrett called me on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. He said that he and Lena had been talking, that they had decided to start seeing a counselor, that there was a lot they needed to work through. He said Lena wanted to call me. I said that was fine. I would be willing to talk. Lena called that Thursday evening. I was making dinner, just soup from a can, one of those quiet solo Thursday nights, and her name came up on my phone, and I stood there for a moment before I answered. She did not apologize right away. She started by saying it had been a stressful year, and that she'd had a lot of pressure, and that the holidays were hard for her. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. And then she said, "I know what you've done for us, and I know I've never said it. I'm sorry for that, Norma. I'm genuinely sorry." It was the first time in 6 years she had said my name like it was just a name, not a judgment. I told her I accepted her apology. I told her I didn't need us to be best friends. That was never what I was looking for. I told her I needed to feel like I was welcome in my son's home and respected as Kaylee and Brody's grandmother, and that if we could get to that place, I was willing to work toward it. She said she wanted that too. I don't know yet if she meant it. Probably the true answer is somewhere in the middle. She meant it in that moment, and the meaning will either grow or fade depending on what we both do next. That's how these things work. There is no single conversation that fixes 6 years. There are just choices made one at a time, and you find out eventually whether you've been building something or dismantling it. What I do know is this. I drove 40 minutes on a dark November morning to make a casserole from my mother's recipe because I love my family. I sat at a table where I was told I was meaningless, and I did not apologize for being there. I said the true thing, as clearly and as calmly as I could. And then I went home and sat in my driveway and let myself feel it. Brody called me the following Saturday, unprompted, on his own. He said, "Grandma Norma, are you coming for Christmas?" I said I thought so, if everyone was okay with it. He said, I want you to make the sweet potato pie." I told him I would make two. Some things are not complicated even when everything around them is. That little boy wanted his grandmother at Christmas, and his grandmother wanted to be there, and we both said so, and that was enough. The rest, Lena and I finding a new way forward, Garrett learning to speak up sooner, me learning to say the hard things before they build up for 6 years, that is all still in progress. I am 63 years old and I am still learning. I imagine I will keep learning until I can't anymore. But I am not a burden. I have never been a burden. And I will not sit quietly at a table and let anyone, in my family or anywhere else, make me believe that I am. I keep thinking about that green bean casserole sitting on the table while the room went quiet. Such a small, ordinary thing. A dish I'd made 100 times, and somehow it was sitting there like evidence of everything I'd never said out loud. Here's what I've come to understand. Looking back on all of it, the way things unfold in a family is rarely random. For 6 years, I made a choice to give without requiring anything in return. And that was the right choice. I stand by it. But there's a version of generosity that quietly teaches people the wrong lesson. When I never said a word about the down payment, about February's heating bill, about 47 Tuesday drives to gymnastics, I thought I was being gracious. What I didn't see was that my silence was also telling Lena that none of it counted, that I expected nothing because I was nothing. Actions have weight, and so does the absence of words. Both of those things were shaping what happened at that table. What I did right, eventually, was hold on to my own sense of what was true. That's harder than it sounds. When someone tells you in front of your grandchildren and your family that you don't contribute anything, the easiest response is to either explode or collapse. I didn't do either. Not because I'm naturally calm, but because somewhere in me I knew the facts of my own life well enough to stand on them. That kind of clarity, the ability to see a situation as it actually is, not as you wish it were or fear it might be, is something I'd built slowly, over years, mostly through hard experience. It's what let me respond instead of react. It's what let me tell Lena the truth without cruelty. And then there's the part that came after. Calling my financial advisor, deciding to stop writing reflexive checks. That was not punishment. I want to be clear about that. It was the decision of a 63-year-old woman who finally understood that continuing to give the same way, under the same conditions, wasn't love. It was avoidance. Real strength, the kind that actually holds a family together over time, isn't in the giving. It's in the honest conversation you keep putting off because you don't want to make things uncomfortable. I waited 6 years too long to have mine. What I hope for Garrett, for Lena, for those two kids who sat so still at that table, is that this was the beginning of something more honest than what we had before. Brody called me on his own that Saturday. He wanted to know about Christmas. He wanted the sweet potato pie. That one phone call told me more about the future than any apology could have. I am not a burden. I never was. But I had to say it out loud before I fully believed it myself. And maybe that's the real thing I want to leave you with. The truth about your own life doesn't protect you until you're willing to speak it. Not loudly, not bitterly, just clearly, to the right people, at the right moment. That Thanksgiving, the moment finally came, and I was ready.